Shalom, this is Yair Davidiy speaking to you from the land of Israel. We are continuing our study of the lost 10 tribes and their place in the world today, and also of relevant contemporary affairs, of current affairs. This week, the Prime Minister of Germany, Angela Merkel, visited Israel, and she held a discussion with the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. So, amongst other things, they discussed the policies concerning Iran. Israel is not pleased with the reaction of Germany to the presence of Iranian researchers, to the ongoing Iranian researchers and endeavours to develop a nuclear bomb. Israel is quite disappointed with the reaction of the European Union and with Germany in particular, because Germany is in effect the most important member of the European Union, and so they spoke on this issue, and they also spoke on other matters. Amongst other things, Prime Minister Merkel protested against the intended demolition of an illegal Bedouin settlement, of illegal Bedouin buildings in a sensitive area. And she also spoke against the Israelis' handling of the Palestinian situation. Merkel supports the Palestinians in effect. Germany supports the Palestinians. Germany is against settlers, Jewish settlers settling in the area of Judah and Samaria. Where I live, in the home of our ancestors, in the home of the Jewish ancestors, in the home of the Israelite people, in Judah and Samaria, in this region, the Germans don't want Jews to settle. And they, in effect, support the Palestinians and the Palestinian protests and even Palestinian terrorism. And they also support NGOs, different organizations, both in Europe, Palestinian organizations, Jewish anti-Israeli organizations, Jewish anti-religious organizations, in other words, organizations against the Jewish religion, against Jewish faith, against biblical truth. There are organizations like this, and Germany gives them money, and Germany also gives money to terrorist organizations. And if you want confirmation of what I'm saying, put it in a Google search engine or any other search engine, insert the words German support for anti-Israeli NGOs and see how many answers you come up. That is what we did, and we came up with literally hundreds or maybe even thousands of answers and different headlines. For instance, Israel accuses the EU of backing anti-Israel NGOs. Germany said to indirectly fund anti-Israel church group. European support for anti-Israel groups. Germany supports anti-Israel NGOs. German government funds radical NGOs that incite violence and praise of terrorism and so on. German government using official channels to funnel support for such organizations. German funding for anti-Israeli propaganda and the like, and the list is almost endless. It is there, and the proof is there, and it's quite public. And Israel regularly protests against this, and Israeli press articles about it, but there are limits to what Israel can do, because Germany is a powerful nation. Germany also helps Israel. It helps Israel economically, diplomatically. On security issues, there's cooperation between Germany and Israel. Germany recently gave Israel submarines, nuclear-powered submarines, which are very important for the Israeli defense setup. And so it is not a black and white situation. But the impression is that Germany does what it does for Israel because it has to, because of the internal pressures, and also because of outside influence. How Germany is perceived by outsiders is important for Germany. Let us explain. Germany in the Second World War caused great damage to European nations. Hundreds of millions were killed, died, people suffered, people were tortured, people were starved to death. people were victimized, persecuted, and a great many nations in Europe are afraid of Germany. The Jews were the hardest hit of all. Also, numerically, they were amongst the Jewish group were amongst those who suffered the most casualties. But apart from that, the Jews, as a proportion of their population, had the greatest losses compared to their total numbers. And also the campaign against the Jews, the persecution of the Jews, was the most virulent. The Jews were the ones the Nazis initially went after. The Jews were the ones the Germans concentrated upon. And the Jews are, as if to say, the canary in the cage. Other nations, they are afraid of Germany. And look how Germany treats the Jews, treats Israel. And according to that, they judge the present situation in Germany. And Germany needs the rest of the world. Germany needs the rest of the world. It needs to get on with them. The rest of the world needs Germany. So Germany has to present a certain facade, a certain way of presenting itself in order to placate the worries and the suspicions and the apprehensions of other peoples. Not only that, but within Germany itself, you have people of liberals. You always had a certain liberal, democratic type tradition within Germany. They were usually a minority. They were intellectuals. They weren't very important. They were only in specific, or mainly in specific geographical areas, mainly in the West. Hamburg and Hesse and Hanover and that region, and they historically were not able to change things. They, when push came to shove, they were the ones who turned out to back Germany military adventures. They didn't have as if to say, a backbone, but they existed. They were always there, and they, as if to say, now, after they have seen what happened in the Second World War, how Germany suffered defeat, how the German people suffered, and how Germany was in danger of almost being obliterated. And they don't want that to happen again. They also don't want it because of due to their instincts of survival, and also out of principle. They genuinely believe in humanitarian ideals, and they don't want this to happen once again. So. And they are important. This group is important in Germany. And so this group also has to be placated. Its apprehensions of Germany military adventures in the future have to be allayed. So these are the factors that exist. So we have here Germany helping Israel, having reasonable, amicable relations with Israel. Supporting Israel, but at the same time working against Israel, encouraging the Palestinians to resist Israel, to work to undermine Israel, and also supplying money and funds and even training and directions to groups that work against Israel, both non-Jewish groups and Jewish groups, to undermine the state of Israel, to undermine the Jewish people. We have these contradictory impulses, these contradictory directions of action that are taking place before our eyes. We have also another point. The Germans claim that they are sympathetic towards the Palestinians and helping the Palestinians and supporting the Palestinians due to humanitarian reasons. They don't want to see people displaced. They compare it to what happened in the Holocaust, God forbid. That these are the expressions, this is the terminology they themselves used. We are not exaggerating. And so this is how they justify what they're doing. But we see that Germany has amicable relations with Turkey. Turkey oppresses the Kurds. It oppresses the Alevi minority within its borders, which is a large percentage of the Turkish population, Muslim people who do not live according to the standards of the mainstream Sunni majority, and other groups. Turkey also oppresses them, and Germany doesn't say anything. Also Iran, Germany tries to get close to Iran. Iran oppresses half of its population, or 40% of its population. Arabs living in Iran, Baluchis living in Iran, Allahs living in Iran. A lot of minorities in Iran are dissatisfied and feel that they're being oppressed by the government, by the establishment. And Germany doesn't care. It's not the concern of Germany. It doesn't interfere. Germany tries to get close to China. In China, you have the Uyghur group of people who are of different ethnic stock to the Chinese, also Muslims, and they're being oppressed by the Chinese, and there are tens of millions of these people. And there are other groups all over the world. There are groups of being oppressed, minorities, and Germany has relations with all of these nations and doesn't say a thing. Only when it comes to Israel, there's a German conscience. Get aroused for some reason. So this too says that we have to look into it and ask, why is this? So in effect, the only answer is that Israel is Jewish. What the Jews do affects Germany, concerns Germany, and disturbs and irritates Germany. And the Germany would want to be openly against the Jewish people, but they cannot do it for the reasons that we listed above, because internally there would be opposition to such measures within Germany itself, amongst the few good people who nevertheless do have some influence. Also, the rest of the world, the neighbours of Germany, need Germany and would not allow it, or would not want Germany to be overduly aggressive against the Jewish people, outrightly anti-Semitic, as if to say, would not go, would not be allowed. Now, these other nations, they do not necessarily like Jews, on the contrary, but the Jews, as if to say, the canary in the cage. And this would wake up warning signals amongst the other countries, and Germany would not want such a reaction to take place. We should remember that Lord Ismay was first Secretary General of NATO. He was one of the first head of NATO when it was founded, as if to say. And he said that NATO was founded in order to keep the Soviet Union out, that is, to keep Russia away, to keep the Americans in, to keep America involved and present in Europe, and to keep the Germans down. In other words, NATO was set up in order to obviate any excuse the Germans might have to become once again a military power. And that is also one of the reasons why even today there are many, many troops, American troops, still on German soil. And they are there, amongst other reasons, not only to prevent possible aggression from Russia, from who knows who, against Europe in general, but also to prevent Germany coming up again. And the Germans know this, and they even want it, they are pleased with it, and they even profit from it, because they don't have to put out so much money of their own to maintain a military defence. But nevertheless, this shows the reality that we still live under, that we still are maintaining ourselves, how the Western world still exists in the shadow of World War II, and the leaders of Western nations are still apprehensive concerning Germany and also Japan. And that is why the security needs of these countries, to some degree, has been placed in the hands of the USA and other peoples. So we have here evidence or indications that Germany is against the Jewish people. And so are a lot of nations. Maybe most nations of the world are like this, apart from a few exceptions. It still raises questions: why is this? What explanation can we give for this? So, a complete explanation would involve metaphysical studies, theological debates, etc. But we can give an indication from one aspect of it. It involves ancestry, ethnical ancestry. Now, in order to appreciate this, some people come and say that present-day DNA does not support the claims we make. So that may be so. We are not so certain, because there are indications in the opposite direction. But take it as it is. Our impressions, or not necessarily only our impressions, there are impressions that present-day DNA, as we know it, is an outcome of environment. You look at the distribution of DNA genotypes of different clades of DNA, and you see a distribution which parallels certain environments to some degree. or sometimes it is an exact one-on-one equivalency. In other cases it is a bit spread out. Yeah, it's a bit of a push to get it there, but it exists. And originally it might have been much closer. In other words, DNA is apparently an outcome of environment. Most pieces of archaeological evidence finding DNA amongst Asian peoples is not reliable for more than 2,500 years ago. In other words, before then the DNA in most areas was different from what it is now, drastically different, even though the ancestors of the people may have been the same as those now existing in those areas. And according to history, at least to some degree, that it must have been the case. In other words, the DNA has changed. So enough to say for the present on this subject. Leave it for the moment, but just keep in mind that DNA, as we know it, DNA relations between the different ethnic groups and different types of DNA, the relationship between DNA, the relationship between ethnic groups and certain types of DNA that exist to some degree did not exist in the past, or did not necessarily was not necessarily the same as it is now. And we have historical researchers indicate that the Germans are descended from Esau. Esau, also known as Edom. We don't say that all of the Germanic peoples come from Edom. We say that a portion of them did, but this portion is numerically significant, also qualitatively important. It was dynamic. It came to dominance at certain periods in German history. It was important, the formation of the German character, and it is still there. So what is this input from Edom? So this Edom is another name for Esau in the Bible. Esau was a twin brother of Jacob. Jacob was the son of Abraham. Abraham was the first Hebrew in the Bible. Abraham the Hebrew, they say. God Almighty established a covenant with Abraham. Abraham was the first Hebrew. Abraham begat Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael became the forefather or part of the Arab peoples, whereas Isaac gave rise to the Israelites and the Edomites. God had promised that he would establish his covenant with Isaac. And my covenant will I establish with Isaac. See Genesis 17:21. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant and his seed after him. Genesis 17:19. In Isaac shall your seed be called. Genesis 21:21. Isaac begat Esau and Jacob. Esau was also known as Edom. Well, the name Jacob was changed to Israel. Jacob became Esau. See Genesis 32:28 and 35:10. On the birth of Jacob and Esau, we are told, Genesis 25, verses 24 to 26, it says, when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, and behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first came forth red all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. In Hebrew, modern Hebrew pronunciation, Esau is pronounced as Esau. Esau and Esau are different versions of the same name. After which his brother came forth, with his hand holding onto Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. Isaac was described as red-haired and hairy, and this would indicate a Caucasian-type person, but the description given to Esau as an Admoni is also applied to King David, as we find in 2 Samuel 16:12 and elsewhere, and also see the Song of Solomon's 5:10, where it says, my beloved is white and red. So this type did exist amongst the house of David and amongst the Israelite nation. May have been a minority, but the trait was also there amongst the Israelites when the sons grew up. Esau was the firstborn, therefore he had certain rights of primogeniture, and Jacob had come after him. But Jacob bought from Esau the right of the firstborn. See Genesis 25:29 and to 34. Later, Jacob impersonated Esau. He pretended to be Esau in order to receive the blessing of their fathers. And this blessing was confirmed by God Almighty. See Genesis 27:1 to 40. And consequently, Esau hated Jacob and planned to kill him in Genesis 27:41. So Jacob fled to Aram to his uncle Laban, where he begat 12 sons, and they became the 12 tribes of Israel. Meanwhile, Esau gave rise to other entities. He begat so many children, they begat children, and they intermarried with different groups, with Hittites and Horites and people from Yair, who also became identified as part of their whole body of peoples associated with them. They had one kingdom to the southeast of Judah, known in classical terminology as Edomites, but they also had other kingdoms, other polities. They had different settlements and different colonies and different areas. They were known as a military group. Esau had been promised that he would be a military power, that he would live in agriculture, in the places that had agricultural bounty, or rich places, and that also that he would live by his sword, and he was a military entity. We find descendants from Esau entire of the Phoenicians. We also find, as we said, in Idumea, southeast of Judah. We have found a place further to the north, in what is now northern Syria, around the area of Gozan, known as Edom Aretz. We find a group known as the Temenu, descended from Teman, a descendant of Esau, the Temenu, and they were an important body of people in ancient Assyria and in Babylon, and later in Thrace and southeast Europe. And we also find people descendants of Edom, which is now Armenia, and later in southeast Europe, in Thrace, and after that amongst the German barbarian peoples, and in Italy, and in Greece. The people of Sparta were descendants of Esau. They gave rise to the Sabines, who were amongst the co-founding peoples of Rome. They gave rise to the Roman Empire, and also gave rise to dominant tribes amongst the barbarian nations who adopted the Germanic languages and invaded Western Europe and settled in what is now Germany. So amongst the Germans, we also find many who derive from Esau, from Edom. And also amongst the Anglo-Saxons, English-speaking peoples, we find descendants from Edom, and also in France, and also in Japan. They helped establish or found the kingdom of Japan, possibly also of China. The Shang dynasty in China had input from a Semitic and nomadic people who may well also have been Edomites. They're all over the place, but they are. We do not get the wrong impression. We're not saying that all these peoples are descended from Edom. We're saying that Edom was important. Edom was a small group who established its presence amongst other peoples and influenced these peoples. In some areas they increased and multiplied and became numerically important, and other areas no. But historically they were there, and so were Israelites. So we find people from Edom also amongst English-speaking nations. There are people from Edom amongst them, but there are also Israelites from the 12 tribes of Israel, from the last 10 tribes of Israel. The Israelite peoples, the 12 tribes of Israel, were in the land of Israel. And then they divided into two different sections. There were 10 tribes in the north, and then in the south there were the tribe of Judah, Benjamin and Levi, and afterwards minority representatives of the other tribes, and they gave rise to the Jewish people. Meanwhile, the 10 tribes in the north, conquered by their sins, taken into exile, and lost awareness and lost consciousness of who they were, where they came from, as did all the other peoples at that time, because they had forgotten God Almighty and departed and adopted ways of pagan nations. But physically they remained, and this is spoken of in prophecy. And a good portion of them migrated and settled amongst Western peoples. And they also settled in the British Isles. And from the British Isles came North America, Australia, New Zealand, and other places. And in the British Isles, not only do we find many Israelites there, but in these areas we can identify specific Israelite tribes. And Britain appears to have been dominated by tribes from Joseph. And as we said, they too gave rise to America. So in effect, America and Britain are both representatives of the tribes of Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. Now, in the 1700s and 1800s and later, there were many millions who came from Germany to the USA. So some of these were also Edomites, because we find anti-Semites amongst them, and one of the qualities of being an Edomite is to be anti-Jewish. But nevertheless, we also find many who are of Israelite ancestry, because some Israelites had also sojourned in that area, and they, as if to say, packed up and moved out. And contemporary observations and other fields of evidence show that those who left were somewhat different from those who stayed behind. And that is why today these peoples, or that is one of the reasons why today these peoples are somewhat sympathetic towards Israel and to the Jewish people, perhaps not to a great degree, but to a degree that is significantly important. And they are remarkable to the effect that they are the only ones who have this quality, or one of the few peoples who have this quality on a consistent basis. And we have prophecies concerning them that in the end times, Edom and Israel, and especially the Israelites from the 10 tribes or from Joseph, will fight against each other, will go to war against each other, and this will involve the land of Israel and Jerusalem. We see Abijah 1, verse 18 onwards. It says, "And the house of Jacob will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Joseph a flame. But the house of Esau will be a stubble, and they will set them on fire and consume them. So there will be no survivor of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken." And it says, 21, "Deliverers will ascend Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord's." You could also look at Abijah 1:20, where he says, "See Rashi on this verse," because on this verse, Rashi especially says that these are the lost 10 tribes who settled in the area known as France, and that is where they are today. That is what Rashi says. Look it up. Those who understand Hebrew should look it up, and also those who do not understand Hebrew should read our own articles and translations on this matter. And not only is Safarat France, the area of France, but it's also the area to the north of it, and also it includes the region of Angleterre, of Britain, of England. See Abarbanel on these verses. So there's much more that we can say, but we've also already said something, matters of great importance, of great interest. I hope we will follow up on them and learn more about them. May the Lord God of Israel bless you. Thank you.